Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. To my fellow classmates and my beloved Madam Hasmiza, I hope you all are doing well. Alright, so today Margaret and I would like to present on chapter 3 of our syllabus, which is developing a consistent game plan for moral reasoning. Alright, so before that, I would like to introduce to my group mates. So the first one is me, myself, Muhammad Adin bin Muhammad Afandi. And then we have Muhammad Iskandar bin Mat Rozi. And also we have Muhammad Amir Akram bin Zain Azman. Yushaini Shazwan bin Yusuf Nizam. And also our group leader, Nur Shafiqah binti Zainal Abidin. Let's get to it. Okay, so these are the learning objectives that we could get from this chapter, which is the first one. We could learn about steps to follow to systematically think through a moral problem. The second one is steps used in thinking through a moral problem in sports. The third one is solving a moral problem. The fourth one is important issues in the development of a consistent game plan. And the last one is obstacles and fallacies in moral reasoning. Okay, so there are 5 steps used in thinking through a moral problem. The first step is any moral principle violated. The second step is any moral rules violated. The third step is this case an exception? The fourth step is are the rules justified? And the last step is how can the rules be changed? Alright, so the case study that we choose regarding steps used in thinking through a moral problem is this case.
Breaking news on CBS Sports HQ, UFC held an event this past weekend, but even they will be postponing their next 3 events due to the coronavirus. The next 3 events postponed.
The first step, which is are any moral principles violated? Alright, so moral principles are divided into 4 points, which is honesty, justice, responsibility, and beneficence. Right. It happens when one agrees to compete, one agrees to apply these moral principles at all times. And if violating the principles, he or she must decide whether the action is an exception to the rules or whether one action is morally unacceptable. Alright, so regarding to our case study, back in 2020, Dana White decided to organize Dana White, which is a UFC president, decided to organize a UFC event during the coronavirus pandemic. But his action was backlash, and a lot of sport organizations disagree with his action, such as NBA, MLB, Major League Baseball, and also the NFL. And his action also leads to the involvement from New York State Athlete State Commission. He has been given a warning to not continue the event. However, Dana White still wants to proceed the event. That make other sport organizations criticize him because they think that Dana White have no responsibility towards the safetyness of the UFC fighters, which makes him portrays him that he only thinks about, he puts the priority of the event first rather than the safety of the UFC fighters. This has shown that Dana has violated the moral principle of responsibility. Alright, so for step number 2, which is are any moral rules violated? Alright, so numerous moral day-to-day rules portrayed by the principle. These rules govern all behavior in sport settings. These specific rules should guide you as you participate. If they do not, you need to address why there are exceptions. Right, so back to the case study, which where Dana White still wants to continue the event despite the coronavirus pandemic. Alright, this has shown that Dana has violated the rules that has been stated in the UFC contract. Alright, so according to the UFC contract or agreement in Article 4, which is Act of God, UFC fighters have the right to pull out of their participation in the event due to the coronavirus pandemic, because it is the act of God. But Dana still wants the UFC fighters to participate in, which clearly prove that Dana has violated moral values that has been stated in the UFC contract. So that is the example for step number 2. That's all from me. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Hi, my name is Husaini Shazwan. Okay, so the step 3 is this case an exception. Exceptions to rules are allowed, but they must be justified. And the second, the burden of proof is determining whether this is an exception is on you to demonstrate that there is a compelling reason to grant this exception. Okay, this step, it states that the rules may have some exception. However, it might show a good reason following the exception. So, regarding Dana White study, actually has justified the reason why he wants to hold the event during coronavirus pandemic. And the reason is, he said that the people entertainment must go on, and so the UFC event must be held in order to entertain the people. So actually, this is not a good reason for why should people as entertainment be the priority during coronavirus pandemic, which lead to the exception for the UFC to hold the event. For example, if the people want to see the entertainment, they can see a lot from YouTube or television during coronavirus pandemic, and not only from the UFC. If the UFC have the exception because just want to entertain people by held the event during coronavirus pandemic, it exactly not fair to the other sport organization. This clearly show that Dana White does not justify a good reason for why the UFC should have the event during coronavirus pandemic. His reason of exception is absolutely unacceptable by the other sport organization. As the other sport organization also disagree for what Dana White has been said. So this is example of the third step. Step 4. Are the rules justified? Some rules are immoral, such as those that damage or punish people arbitrarily. Even if the rule appears to have a valid purpose, you can honestly claim that it is exactly incorrect if it violates of your moral standard. So it states that some rules are undoubtedly immoral and need to evaluate whether good or bad. Alright, so for this case, Dana White decides to silence the criticism by holding the event at the private island. All staff will wear the mask, hand sanitizer, sit 1 meter away from each other, and the ring will be sanitizing before and after fight. Dana White believes that the rules can help to continue the event by minimize the getting risk. However, Dana White forgot athlete safety, which is traveling from one country to another. In this light, this is a UFC strawweight champion Zhang Weilin states that since pandemic has begun, she has to travel to many countries in order to make it to the USA. This is because her country, China, has banned travel to several countries, and one of the countries is USA. This exposed her risk of her health by exposing herself to the coronavirus. As the result of this traveling during UFC 249 at the private island, one of the UFC fighters, Jakara Souza, in this picture, will tested that positive COVID-19. Souza had to travel from Brazil to the fight at the private island. This causes a huge blow to the UFC as the rules that they have followed are not efficient. So this is show that Dana White failed to evaluate the rules are good. Alright, step 5. How can the rules be changed? The first one, you can easily adjust the day-to-day regulation if there are your personal rules. Second, if the modification affect a broad social group such as sport governing bodies rules, political action, a demonstration, or a legislative reform may be required. Okay, the answer is yes, it can be justified if it gets influenced by the people that have power. Alright, so in this slide, for this issue regarding the UFC getting serious about one of the athletes get infected by the coronavirus, they state that Dana White have risked the life of the athlete and need to stop an event for a while. However, Dana White still wants to continue the event by tightening the security protocol. This causes other sport organizations furious with Dana White, so they decide to make a letter and send to the Donald Trump, which is the USA president, as you can see in this picture. The letter causes Trump to take action to Dana White and discuss regarding the issue. As a result, Dana need to decide to postpone the next event, the next UFC event, and Trump wanted him to stop for a while. So, from the explanation, we can relate it with the last step, which is the rules can be changed by people that has power and influence.
Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And my name is Nur Syafiqah binti Zana Abidin, and now I want to continue with my part. Okay, I will explain about the obstacle and fallacies. Obstacle have four. The first one is skepticism. The second one is cultural and relative ethics. Number 3 is dogmatism. And the last one is number 4 is false obstruction of theory and practice. Okay, about the fallacies. Fallacies have 10. The number 1 is fallacies in reasoning. Number 2, fallacy of authority. Number 3, ad hominem arguments. Number 4, misplaced and improperly placed authority. Number 5, the appeal to force. Number 6, the appeal to pity and ridicule. Number 7, begging the questions. Number 8, equivocations. Number 9, psychological obstacles. And the last one is the number 10 is a final comment on courage. Okay, in this slide I will tell you guys about the obstacle one, which is the skepticism. Okay, the definition of skepticism: an attitude of doubt or disposition to incredulity either in general or toward a particular object, or the doctrine that true knowledge or knowledge in a particular area is uncertain. The explanation: being skeptical is not a bad thing, and a healthy dose of professional skepticism is essential in fighting fraud. Even if it seems unnatural or uncomfortable to be skeptical of this we have come to trust. For the example, the first one is the teacher was skeptical when Timmy told her the dog ate his homework. And the second one is John was skeptical when the television ad said the cleaner would take all the stains. In this slide showed the case study of skepticism. This is the journal article. The title is "What is a good skeptic to do?" The case for skepticism in media violence discussion. The author is Douglas A. Gentile, Iowa State University. The discussion about violence video games tends to engender extreme position, each of which are deserving of deep skepticism. Fagan's 2015 claimed that humans can do something repeatedly with no effect on them should be examined carefully, especially as it violates more established psychological and learning theories. Continue with the obstacles 2, which is the cultural and relative ethics. The definition is different culture holds a different cultural codes of conduct. The explanation: culture and society determine what is right and what is wrong. For example, in addition, culture can also demonstrate the way a group thinks, their practice or behavioral patterns, or their views of the world. For example, in some countries like China, it is acceptable to stare at others in public or to stand very close to others in public space. Okay, next. In this slide, explain about the obstacle 3, which is the dogmatism. The definition is the tendency to lay down principle undeniable true without consideration of evidence or the opinions of others. The explanation, sticking to widely accepted belief even when faced with contrary evidence. For the example, the problem many have with a dogmatic acceptance of any theory, scientific or not, is a lack of proof. Okay, the last one is obstacle 4, which is the false obstruction of theory and practice. The definition of false obstruction of theory and practice is false blockage of a theory and practice. Explanation: theory that are just a theory without practice or something that can prove its truth. Society does not accept and do not believe this theory because there is no solid evidence to prove it. And for the example, ethical theory is after all only a theory and therefore not factual, realistic or practical.
Alright, now I would like to explain about fallacies in reasoning. So there are many other fallacies that my friend and I will explain later. So first I would like to go to the definition. So fallacies in reasoning can be defined as mistaken belief in the act of critical reasoning. So what does it mean? It means that the majority of people make decisions based on psychological rather than philosophical consideration. So these fallacies can be either illegitimate arguments or irrelevant points and are often identified because they lack evidence that supports their claim. So all in all, fallacious reasoning leads to false conclusion. Alright, next we will go to the first one, which is fallacies in authority. Fallacies in authority is making an assumption that something is true only because someone in a position of power and authority says so. Plus, there will never be an objection towards any higher authority's reasoning. For example is, Mr. Lim once said that drinking alcohol is good for our health as he is the one and only famous councillor in Negeri Sembilan. In fact that we all know that alcohol brings negative impact to our health, but because of Mr. Lim is the one and only famous councillor in Negeri Sembilan, so there will be people that believe with his word, which said that drinking alcohol is good for our health. Alright, next for the second one is ad hominem arguments. Ad hominem arguments happen when someone targeting the character, motive, or something else of the person involved in the conflict, which then omitted genuine discussion of the issue. In other words, they blame the person instead of discussing the topic of the argument. For example, like there's two individual, which is seller and buyer. So the seller said that you should consume this product daily to gain a clean and smooth face. And the buyer replied with, why should I listen to someone that have an ugly face as you? So in this situation, we can see that instead of talking about the product, the buyer face shaming the seller by saying that his face is ugly. Okay, these are the case study regarding the ad hominem argumentation. So during the late 1860s, Northern newspaper struck Lincoln policies by attacking his character using the terms drunk, baboon, too slow, foolish, and dishonest. This method been so prominently used in the major political campaign of the past few years. Ad hominem argument used in political issues, which turned out to be interesting in showing the dialectical framework applies and advancing knowledge. This method worked in political argumentation, a democratic system in which media reportage of events have big role influencing the votes. Okay, next is misplaced and improperly placed fallacies. So these fallacies happen when you put trust to someone who is expert even though he has little experience on that matter. We pay attention to what they say about something even though the supposed expert has little experience on the matter. For example, like a football player, a substitution football player. Okay, he has a little play time in the field. However, he's still an expert who knows to overcome the problem in the field. Okay, now we go to appeal to force fallacies. So what is appeal to force? Appeal to force is a faulty argument that is based on the threat of harm and is not relevant to the argument itself. In short, the threat does not prove or disprove the truth of the statement. Appeal to force happens when force, coercion, or even a threat of force is used in place of a reason in an attempt to justify a conclusion. So example is by using threat. If you don't finish these vegetables, you will get coronavirus.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So moving on to the next fallacy, which is appeal to pity and ridicule. So the definition of this fallacy is using one's emotions of another person to accomplish one's target or prevents being the center of attention. The appeal to pity threat is typified in "Please help me, I'm always wrong, you do not like me, nobody likes me." So I'm certain that all of you have heard someone's been using this type of sentence in order to get sympathy from us to them to achieve their targets. And the example that I can give you is when you open your televisions and saw starving African kids that does not have a proper meal for several days and starving and crying in their homes, poor homes. And right after that scene, the organization asked for donations from us to feed this poor kid. That is the example of these fallacies. Moving on to the next fallacy, which is begging to questions. Using one thing to justify or support the same thing is the definition of these fallacies. It implies that the statement is based on inaccurate or repeated information. For an example that I can give you is, of course, smoking causes cancer. Smoke from cigarette is a carcinogen. So as you can see, the main point here is the first sentence, which is smoking causes cancer, and the last sentence, which is the smoke from cigarette is a carcinogen, is being used in order to justify the main point at the first sentence. So another example that I can give you is Madam Hasmiza is very beautiful. It is because that she have a roundy face, pointy nose, and a fair skin. Yep. I hope you understand. Thank you. Moving on to the equivocations fallacy. So the definition of the equivocation is by using words that are interpreted wrongly or have the wrong meaning in order to prove a point. And the explanation that I can give you is by using words with the wrong meaning or incorrectly using words. There are also a definition that I found in the Google, which is equivocation happens when a key phrase in an argument is used in an ambiguous way, with one meaning in one portion of the argument and then another meaning in another portion of the arguments. You can see in the slide examples. A warm beer is better than a cold beer. After all, nothing is better than a cold beer, and a warm beer is better than nothing. As you can see, there are 2 points that have been made in the 2 sentences. Okay, the first point, a warm beer is better than a cold beer. Okay, then you know the point, right? And the last one is, after all, nothing is better than a cold beer. This contradicts the point that have been made by the first one. So that is equivocation. And another one that I can give you is equivocation also when you use a word that could have a different meanings in order to hide what you really means. It is a great way to not quite lie, but you still lie, which is why equivocation is not a good thing. For example, if your boss asks you where all the merchandise goes, and you say, someone took it, but you know that someone is you, that is equivocation. Moving on to the case study, which is related to equivocation. So long story short about this case study, it is about a US National Football League NFL quarterback named Tom Brady, which are involved in a case study during 2015. So during a press conference, he's being asked by the reporter about the scandal, and he responds it by saying, "I don't know, I have no idea." So why did he say this even though he know about the answers from the scandal? So according to a research from 2002, it says One of the biggest pressures on world champion athletes is coping with reporters' questions. Reporters can ask tough questions of athletes in which any direct answer could pose problems for the player and team. So by this research, the NFL trains their athletes for handling interviews. And one of the tips that he gave it to the athlete is, don't be afraid to say, I don't know the answers to that questions. Because even though the athlete does not have the power to control what type of questions they are being asked by a reporter, however, they have a fully control on the answers. Thank you. The next fallacy is psychological obstacle. So by definition, it means that using slogans or cliches to express themselves. An explanation for this fallacy is the use of psychological barriers just for reasoning. Psychological obstacles also refers to any mental or emotional issue that interferes with your ability to perform your best consistently in the biggest competitions of your life. You know, as you can see from the examples, some athletes are perfectionists, that is a psychological obstacle, because they are putting a high goals that are often unachievable. Perfectionists are always more afraid of failure than they are of success. They are therefore unable to take calculated chances because for them it is too risky. And the last fallacy is a final comment on courage. By definition, it means moral reasoning will help you overcome your biases, discard convictions based on false premises, and better understand the perspective of others. For the explanation, if nothing else happens, you have improved your moral skills by being able to tell whether moral decisions are rational or irrational. And for an example that I can give you is, an athlete comments on using drugs are wrong before a competition because it provides unfairness towards the other competitor. And as you can see, the athlete are able to distinguish between rational or irrational decisions on whether to use drugs during competitions is good or bad. And for the conclusions is, the first one, the development of personal and professional rules or guides should be supported by rules. And the second one, we have 5 steps to follow in order to apply this rule, as well as various challenges and risks to contend with. And the last conclusion is, you can use these resources in order to look at today's most pressing sports issues.
I need somebody who can love me at my worst. No, I'm not perfect.